morning and a very warm welcome to the EPC Friday update, our weekly look at the key developments in relation to COVID-19 and the implications for Europe's economy, society, its global role, and for European politics in general. My name is Jackie Davis. I'm a senior advisor to the European Policy Centre, and with me, as always this week, are Fabian Zuleeg, Chief Executive of the European Policy Centre, Janis Emmanouilidis, Director of Studies at the European Policy Centre, and we're joined for the second week running by a special guest, EPC Policy Analyst Marta Pilati, because today we are going to focus for the whole hour of the weekly update on the European Commission's new proposals for the Multiannual Financial Framework and the so-called Recovery and Resilience Facility. We're going to find out more about what exactly has been proposed, and we're going to discuss whether it will fly. What are the chances of getting the EU 27 to agree, and where might the landing zone be? What might the final shape of a deal look like? As always, this session is totally interactive. I'm going to ask some questions of our speakers, and then I'll open up to all of you. I'm going to open up to the audience twice in this session. After the first part, where we're really going to concentrate on the content of the proposals, and then after the second part, when we talk about the politics and the likelihood of a deal. Usual housekeeping notes for those joining for the first time or who forget between sessions because they're using so many online platforms. Your microphones are muted. If you want to ask a question when I open to the floor, click on the hand-shaped button, raise your hand, and I will unmute you when the time comes, and I'll tell you I've done it. Or you can write your question. Click the enter a question button, write it and hit enter. But once again, the usual plea, please for brevity. Quick questions, not long comments, please, so I can read them fairly quickly. We have a large number of you watching, as we do every week now. Hundreds of you join this call. So if we can't get to all your detailed questions, we will try to reply to them in writing afterwards. So that's enough from me. Let's get started. An opening question to you all, if I might. Ursula von der Leyen described this as Europe's moment. The President of the European Parliament, David Sassoli, went even further. This is a 21st century European D-Day, he said when the proposals were unveiled. So before we get into what they've proposed, can I just ask for a quick assessment from each of you of what you actually think of these proposals? Let's disregard for the moment whether it's doable politically, whether there's a landing zone. Is this the right package at the right time? Marta.
Thanks, Jackie. Yes, I think it's a good proposal for a few reasons. First, it spreads the costs of this crisis over time. It gives grants, which is needed to avoid public debt increases in some countries. Yes, it's not huge. The overall size is relatively small, but it is significant in the countries that are most targeted. And lastly, I think it kills two birds with one stone because it allows to, at the one time, spur recovery, and on the other side, to invest in the key long-term priorities of sustainability and digitalization.
Okay. Fabian.
I think it is a good proposal. I think we can't completely divorce it from the feasibility question because ultimately we have to have a proposal which can pass. No matter how good the proposal is, if in the end it politically doesn't fly, then it doesn't help us. So in that sense, I think it is a good proposal, not only because of its content, but also because I think there's a political landing zone where we can get to get something like this proposal through. Of course, there will still be changes, there will still be tweaks, but I think overall it is a feasible proposal. Is it enough? I think it is probably not, but is it enough at this stage? Probably yes. I would say that in the longer term more will be needed, but in the longer term more will be needed not only at European level, more will be needed at national level, more will need to be done, because this crisis is a structural crisis which will have a long-term impact And we will also need to think about how we deal with some of the longer term effects of this, for example, in terms of accumulation of national debt in all countries, not just in those which are already being challenged. So yes, there will have to be more. So I would not only see this as a proposal for now, but also as a stepping stone, which allows us to do more in future.
Thank you. Janis, your assessment, Europe's D-Day?
Well, I wouldn't exaggerate with these kind of wordings. In general, I would be careful with these things. But I think that it also, on my side, it's thumbs up. I agree it is a good proposal. Yes, it's not perfect. We already seen that some are criticizing it, some are saying it goes too far, some say it's by far not enough. But I think it's sending a strong message. It's sending the message that the EU is ready to face the crisis, and this is a message which will have to come from the member states now too. It is a show of solidarity, as we were saying often in this program, out of enlightened self-interest. It is a good sign of solidarity. It is targeted. It's targeting actually the countries which have been hit most by the crisis. This is positive, and it is substantial. It's a substantial package. If you put everything together, the MFF, but also the restructuring, the recovery elements, plus all the things which have already been decided beforehand, I think we have a good number in place. Plus, it is often real money. We're talking about grants. There's not too much of financial wizardry. And it also foresees some help to start already in 2020, which is important as the economic crisis is showing its immediate effects in many countries. And I think, by the way, just a final remark, it is positive that it is embedded in the MFF, because this, I think, is a key in order to get this thing off the ground, get it flying. We will talk about whether this is how much of a base it is to elaborate a compromise, but I think it is.
Thank you very much, and we'll come back on lots of those issues. But what I'd like to do now, Marta, is could I ask you, please, just to outline for us what for you are the most striking elements of this deal? We knew some of what was coming, some of it less expected. What would you identify as the most important characteristics of the deal?
So of course there's much to say, but just to be brief, we know this package is composed of two parts. There's the regular MFF for the next 7 years, which has remained substantially unchanged from what was on the table, and then there is this next generation EU, which is where the new instruments are. I think first it's fundamental to say that this is the EU borrowing on financial markets a considerable amount of money through EU debt guaranteed by the EU budget. How much? We are talking about 750 billion of borrowing. Of these, 250 are loans, 60 are guarantees to the EIB, and the rest, so 440 billion, are grants to be distributed to EU budget programs. Overall, as Yanni was saying, this is real money. It's very little trickery, it's very little wizardry, and it amounts to about 5% of EU GDP over 4 years. How is this going to be allocated? The total for member states is still unclear. It depends on how much the EU budget programs will be distributed. But there is some targeting of the most affected areas, and the criteria that we see are the ones related to population, GDP and GDP loss, relative prosperity, and unemployment. Of course, it comes with strings attached. There is a very strong link to the European semester. There will have to be reform and investment plans to be agreed by the Commission, drafted by member states, but agreed by the Commission. And these will have to be very much in line also with the green and digital transformation and the long-term priorities of the EU in this sense. On repayments, this EU debt has a very long maturity, so we are starting after 2028 to pay this back, and until for 30 years, so this is quite good. How is this going to be repaid? There are two options. Either member states will pay more in the future into the EU budget, or, and this is what the Commission proposed, the member states should agree to new own resources, which are new sources of revenue that the EU will have access to, and these include, for example, a taxation on digital activities, a taxation on big companies operating in the single market, a carbon border adjustment mechanism, which was already discussed, and an extension of the emission trading system to new sectors. What can be done already in 2020? This is relatively little, because the borrowing on the markets will only be able to happen next year. So what the Commission suggested to do in 2020 is to increase marginally the regulations for this year budget. So to have about 11 billion euros more to spend this year. This is small, of course, but it's already something to get started, especially with the cohesion programs and with some of the financial instruments in support of EU companies. These are my main points. Of course, this was very broad. I'm happy to go back into detail, of course, in the discussion.
A great whistle-stop tour of a very complicated proposal with pages and pages of detail. But let's delve into some of these things first. Janis, can I just pick up on the point you made about, you said it was very positive that it's embedded in the MFF. Can you explain a little bit more that link between the Recovery and Resilience Facility and the MFF, and why that link is so important?
It's more than a link. The recovery instrument is embedded in the EU budget, so it is part of the next MFF. And I think that is positive because it is assuring. It is assuring, especially those who are afraid that things might move in the wrong direction, who are afraid that there will be no conditions attached to how the money will be dispersed, which is not true, because as Marta was very eloquently and smartly putting things together, she was also telling us that there will be national recovery plans which will be underpinning how the money will be going to member states, and all that will be part of the European semester. So by having it as being part of the MFF, it is including what is being now being done extraordinarily on a temporary basis. It is crisis related, and this is for 4 years. It's not something which will stay there forever. We will see what will remain structurally thereafter, but that's the discussion we will be holding later. But I think the fact that it's part of the MFF, one, is assuring to those who are critical, and it is also embedding it in the overall system of the EU, which means that it also attributes roles to the Commission. It gives the European Parliament a key role to play. And so being part of the system, I think, is reassuring from an institutional perspective, but also from a political perspective when it comes to as to whether these proposals will actually fly at the end of the day.
And Fabian, just a word, if you would, on how this proposal compares with the Franco-German proposal unveiled last week, and also that alternative plan from the Frugal Four, as we like to call them, which was unveiled at the weekend, but doesn't seem to have got much traction in the last few days. But how does it look, and does it seek to balance those two plans?
Just to pick up one point on the MFF, I think we also should see the reverse of this. This is also important that it's embedded in the MFF because it increases the chance that we get the MFF through. And that was one of the key issues which we were facing. Yes, I think it is concerning that we're not going to get spending money quick enough. I think, yes, there are some provisions for doing things this year, but we could have faced an even worse situation. We could have faced a situation where we didn't have agreement on the MFF, and that all European spending would not have started regularly at the beginning of next year. So the counterfactual to what we have now is hopefully that we will have an MFF which is up and running, which is able to disperse money and which is able to function. Of course, that still requires that political agreement. We still haven't got that yet. And in part, we haven't got that yet because, as you have highlighted, we still have very different views on what should be done at the European level and how that should be balanced. I think the key difference on a very high level between the Frugal proposal and the Franco-German proposal has been the balance between loans-based instruments and grant-based. and then how far there is control and conditionality. I think what we have in the Commission proposal is a compromise. It has elements of everything in it, but I would say it's probably a compromise which leans more heavily in the direction of the Franco-German proposal rather than the Frugal Four proposal.
Yeah. Can I just come back on the question of conditionality, Marta? Because I was quite struck reading the proposals. It talks repeatedly, whenever it talks about financial support, it talks about to support reforms and investments. And it starts with reforms and then says investments. And also you identify this very clear link to the European semester, must address the challenges outlined in the European semester, but also a link to green, to digitalization. Presumably that's to satisfy the Frugal Four, but could it, on the other hand, is the level of condition, how tough does it look in terms of that conditionality at first reading to you?
I think the key question on this is the level of detail that they will want to see in this national recovery and resilience plans that the member states will have to submit for approval to the Commission. The risk, I mean, first, it's clearly understandable that there needs to be some sort of conditions on this. It needs to be related to the priorities and to the recommendation that the Commission gives every year to governments. The risk is that if there is too much condition, then this takes a lot of time. And time here is crucial. In the disbursement of this money should arrive next year. And instead, what we can see in the documents, for example, is that the commitments will arrive next year and in 2022. But when we talk about payments, those will come later on, and even the Commission estimates the peak of payments to be in 2024. Now, for me, that's a bit too late, and I think one would have to see what the details are of these national plans. But the risk, if it's too detailed, then you have a time issue. And also there's been some hints to the member states being involved in assessing these national plans. The commissioner have been a bit vague, but they were talking about binding advice that the member states can give on these national plans, even though the final decision would remain with the Commission.
Okay, thank you. Janis, you wanted to come in on this?
Yes. Time is of essence. Here Marta is right, because obviously money needs to go to the countries who are especially in need as fast as possible. But it will take some time. And I think that we can assume that the level of conditionality, the concreteness of conditionality will be one of the issues that will be discussed among the EU 27. And I expect that the level of conditionality will rather be increased than lowered. And that creates more of a time problem, as Marta was already alluding to. But at the same time, I think we should not only see this from the perspective of those who now argue this is in favor of what the Frugal Four want. One, it's more than only the F4, the Frugal Fours, who are thinking in this direction. And second, to spend the money which will be now coming from additional funding, so not only the MFF, but also from the additional new resources, the 750 billion, to use that money smartly is in the interest also of those who will be using that money. So I think it is now wise for all of them, especially those who will get a big chunk of that money, who are now facing severe problems because of the crisis, to now already start preparing their plans, to think of how they actually want to implement what and what they would want the money for. And by doing that, I think they could send a strong signals, which could also then send a signal to those who are more critical, and to say, look, they are preparing, they have sound plans, and that is something which we can then speed up. So it is also on the side of those who actually want that money, need that money to prepare themselves very, very early on, i.e. from now on.
Thank you. Fabian, you also wanted to come in on this point.
Yeah, just to say that I think it's important to recognize that conditionalities are not only important to the Frugal Four, I see this as a crucial element also in the discussion within Germany, and to make this whole package acceptable for the German public and for the German political system. Conditionalities have to be in there. I think there is still a question about the rule of law conditionality. I think we shouldn't lose sight that this, I would say, in the public debate, certainly in countries like Germany, is probably more important than some of the other conditionalities. But on the European semester, I think there's a real question about, is this simply something which is there to placate these concerns, or is it going to have a practical impact on how the money is spent, how the programs are done? And we have to recognize that the European semester has not worked effectively in the past to really enforce some form of expenditure direction on member states. I would probably argue it has worked as an advice mechanism for those countries which have been willing to take the advice. But as something more strict, the current European semester hasn't really worked.
Okay.
And I don't think it is going to work unless there's some reform of how the whole mechanism functions.
We have a question relating to that, but the other side of the European semester coin, with a greater need to monitor how and if funding will be truly targeted needs, should we also be seeing an accompanying reform of the European semester itself, which, according to the questioner, has shown itself to be wholly inadequate in conditioning funds towards the targeting of needs? So is there a parallel reform needed of the European semester in terms of making sure the money goes where it's really needed? Can anybody pick up on that point?
well, by embedding the recovery instrument and by embedding elements of it into the European semester, you are de facto reforming the European semester. You're giving it actual teeth and you're giving it strong carrots. It is becoming something which I think will in future be more relevant than it was in past, where often you felt that the European semester was something which member states had to do. There was an obligation, but they were not very much engaged in the exercise. There was not a lot of debate on at national level on what was actually the targets which member states had set in the framework of the European semester. Now I think this will be different because there will be actually money linked to this, linked to the national plans, and that will de facto mean a reform of the European semester. But just one word with respect to conditionality, and I think this is important. When we talk about conditionality, and especially for the countries who fear that it might move in the wrong direction, we're not talking about a troika. We're not talking about memoranda of understanding. This has nothing to do with what we've seen in the past when we were in the context of the euro area crisis, when we had these things. We had troikas, we had memoranda of understanding. This is not the kind of conditionality we're talking about. It's embedded in the overall MFS system, the system which is there already. It will have to be adopted, but it is not something which will resemble what some member states really fear, which is that they will be told what to do, and that austerity will be imposed on them.
Okay.
That's what many fear.
Two questions. I'm going to leave aside for the moment the questions that relate to the political feasibility of all of this, but got a question. Will more euro money be printed to achieve recovery fund and MFF goals? And if so, what would the consequences be? And the question, is this package in accordance with the German Constitutional Court ruling, that ruling by Karlsruhe on the ECB's quantitative easing program? Can anybody help with those two before we move on? Janis, can I come back to you again?
I'm happy to.
Or Fabian, yeah, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Just on the previous one, I just wanted to disagree a little bit with Janis, because I think it is relatively easy to come up with national recovery plans which are broad enough and vague enough to pass any muster, because in the current circumstances, who's really going to go to a country and say you cannot spend money on these kind of issues? I would think that is at least for the foreseeable future rather unlikely. So I think it is important to have this kind of conditionality there because it reassures people, but in reality, I don't think it will have a particular impact on the spending priorities. But we will see. But that's something I think will also be dependent on what countries we're talking about and how this will be organized overall. On the Bundesverfassungsgericht, I would say that is the problem for the Bundesverfassungsgericht. It is, as we have seen with the ruling before, this is now something which the German system has to sort out because we cannot have a situation where the decisions of the European Court are undermined, are put into question at the national basis. So I'm sure there will be some form of challenge in Germany. There always is. But in the end, the German system has to sort out how it deals with these kind of questions. If it truly is about Germany being a reliable partner within the European Union, this is a fatal signal. If we have Germany on a political level moving such a big step, I mean, this is an enormous shift in German policy, and that being then torpedoed on legal grounds. So I think this is something which will need to be sorted out on the ECB. I think there is not that direct link in terms of spending being directly linked to the ECB's monetary policy, but clearly what we're talking about here is an overall package. It's a package where the European Union and its member states have to use all of the instruments at their disposal to try to mitigate the worst of the impact of this crisis. And that will mean that the ECB will have to continue doing what it is doing now. It will have to continue to vamp up what it is doing as much as possible, while at the same time, we also have this package, we also have the MFF, we also have the national actions which are there. So it's not one or the other, it is a whole package of different measures which are needed.
Thank you. Marta, I don't know whether you can help with this one. Is the amount of money that we're talking about really absorbable for the most affected countries and their economies? Will they really be able to make use of it? And a quick one on that, if you would.
Yes, I think that's a relevant question. We see that, for example, some countries sometimes can even absorb the amounts of cohesion policy. So the criticism now is if you can't absorb the total of cohesion policy, how will you be able to absorb this? Now I think it's an issue, but I think it's possible. I think in these countries there is a lot of need for this money at this very moment. So I think it would be very counterproductive if they didn't come up with a relevant plan. And also if on this, at this stage, these plans will have to be decided on a national level. Instead, sometimes the issues that we see with cohesion policy absorption is that the regional administrations don't have the capacity to come up with the projects. So I feel that the national level would be able to, at the end, put together a recovery and resilience plans that make sense and that can direct the investment in the needed direction.
Thank you. Janis.
And I
agree. I agree. I think that the money will be absorbed. And I think that the money will be absorbed despite the difficulties which Marta was already alluding to, because of the gravity of the crisis we're going to be witnessing. There will be a lot of need to put money into the economies. And you will see that governments will be forced to find ways to effectively make that happen, also with respect to money coming from the European Union level. So I'm not fearing that the money will not be absorbed. In addition, I would say, because now many people say that the loans will not be really used, I think that also the loans will be used. When we sit together in a couple of years, we will see that also loans will be something which will be attractive from the perspective of a good number of member states. The same goes, by the way, for the ESM loans, which many people now say are not going to be used. So all the instruments which we have at our disposal, whether they're linked to the MFF, whether they're linked to the Next Generation EU, whether they're linked to other instruments and to the ECB, all that will have to be used because the necessity will be so strong to use it. And that in the end will also lead to what some people call print money. And that's something which we have to probably accept.
Okay, I want to, yeah, Fabian, did you want to make a quick remark on that?
Yeah.
Did I see you? Yeah, very brief one if you would, because I want to begin to discuss
Sure.
now the political feasibility question.
I think there are three areas where I think we need to be careful that we make it as easy as possible to use these funds. One is any requirement for match funding or national spending to support this. It will be very, very difficult to find money at the national level in the forthcoming month. Second one is what this can be spent on. And I think there's a huge need for spending on public services. So in some ways, we need to go over the hurdle of the restrictions of the spending. We need to make sure that in those countries where some of the basic public services are not functioning anymore, that they can use the money as flexibly as possible. And the third is the question of expertise and having the ability to construct some of these things. So when we're talking about, for example, loan funding, often we're talking about relatively complex public-private partnerships, the kind of things which are being done through the European Investment Bank. We need to make sure that the member states, but also the regional authorities, the local authorities, which are often going to be the ones who are needing to spend this money, have the capacity to deal with that and have the support if they don't have the capacity.
Okay. I want to come to the politics of all of this now and talk about the possible landing zone. You've already hinted at areas in which the proposal may or may not be acceptable to the Frugal Four. You've hinted at areas where it may or may not be acceptable to those behind the Franco-German package. Do you believe that we have, despite all the noise and sound, the basis here for a deal, that there is enough room for maneuver, for horse trading, for give and take between the MFF provisions and the Recovery and Resilience Facility initiative and so on, to actually get us to a deal? Where's the landing zone, Janis, if it looks possible?
I think that the proposals we now have on the table are positive in terms of reaching a compromise. I think that a compromise is possible. Question is, how long will it take? How tough of the negotiations we will witness, and what kind of compromise will come out of this. But I think, yes, it is possible that there will be a compromise. We see that a vast majority of member states are supportive of the proposal. All those who are in particular need obviously are in favor. The Germans and the French are very much pushing, and I think, as we said in the beginning, it reflects in many ways what the Franco-German proposal had set out in basic of what should be included in it. We also see that we have some positive reactions from governments in Central and Eastern Europe. We always have been concentrating on the Frugal Four, but it's also important to see whether the countries in Central and Eastern Europe, especially the countries of the Visegrad Four, are supportive. And we hear some positive remarks coming, for example, from Poland, which, by the way, will also profit a good way from the proposals if you look into the numbers. So the problematics are the cases of the Frugal Four, and here I think especially the Dutch and the Austrians, because you can already sense that from the Danes and from the Swedes, there were some indications of, oh, we can discuss these things, this is a proposal being worth looking at, whereas from the Austrians and the Dutch, you hear more critical voices, but even there, you hear that there is a readiness to use it as a basis for discussions. One question is, with respect to those who are most opposing, in this case, the Frugal Four and parts of them, the question of what will be the relationship between loans and grants. We now have 500, 250. I think we will see that they will be playing with this. There's a second element which is important to them, but not only them, which is the rebate question. And there are now already indications that the phasing out of the rebate will happen later, more gradual. So that's giving an indication to those countries, don't be too fearful of this. Then I think you will see a lot of tweaks here and there. We're already discussing some of them now, and that relates especially to the conditionality. As we were saying, I think we will see that there will be a strong debate about what kinds of conditions will be attached. I follow the logic of Fabian, who had been saying, let's be careful with this. But at the same time, I think in the negotiation, we will see that this will be a tough one. And we will see that it's not only the F4, the frugal four, who will be defending this. I also see in my half home country, Germany, that there will be a lot of discussions about conditionality. There's a vast amount of Germans who are in favor of this project, of this program, of these proposals. They don't know the details, but they're positive about it. But when it comes to conditionality, I think you will see that a lot will be pushing in that direction.
Okay, Marta, your sense of where the landing zone might be and how important it is that these things, you know, people talk about there being now elements of a grand bargain that might be struck, particularly because of this embedding of the proposals into the MFF, that creates the room for not only to change the grants loans balance, but also in all sorts of other areas, that everyone will be able to, in classic EU fashion, to claim a win at the end of it, which is always, as we know, the key to budget negotiations. So how do you see that landing zone area where everyone will be able to say, we got what we wanted? Does it exist?
Yes, I think I'm quite positive on this. I think that linking the two packages together, so this new facility and the MFF, I think that was smart, also because it reassures countries that the money will go through programs that are known already. So the time also needed to look into these programs to know how they will work, who will get what, it's shorter. Time would be critical, as we said. If in the best case scenario we have an agreement in July, which is not a given, then we need national parliaments ratification. This will take time. Again, best case scenario, this happens before the end of the year, and then the experts are actually saying that the first issuance of bonds could happen maybe around the summer of next year. So there is a need to make this as quickly as possible, and we will see, as was said by Janis, some horse trading trade-offs between the package and the MFF. The frugal fours have always been in favor of a modernized MFF. The Commission has gone a bit towards that by increasing the budget of Horizon, for example, in the Digital Europe program. But arguably, that might be not enough. Also, they're increasing agriculture policy funding, which is something that the frugals might reject. So I'm sure we will see some changes in the budget of regular EU programs towards what the frugals have said. And as Janis said, the rebates are essentially scrapped. The cancellation of rebates is essentially scrapped to a much later point in time. So I think that's really a win for them. But is this enough? That's a question.
But interesting that you indicate that you talked about the possibility of a deal in July. There is a question saying, when can we expect this deal? Will it be an early win for the German presidency? Fabian, your sense on that? And there's a specific question. We've talked about the Frugal Four. We've talked less about its acceptability to the South. Is it enough? Do they think it's enough? Will they be okay with the conditionality that's attached to it? But also, you mentioned seems to have gone down reasonably well with Central and Eastern Europeans. In terms of the rule of law debate, we have a question, does this change the dynamic around the debate on rule of law conditionality? So how are they likely to react overall? Where are you seeing this?
On the conditionalities, I think what we are going to see is, to coin a phrase, that we continue to have strong de jure conditionality, but not very strong de facto conditionality. I think that in the end, there will have to be something in there to also reassure publics in countries like Germany. But in the end, does it actually lead to changes in expenditure? Does it lead to sanctions? I see that as extremely difficult. We will have to have a compromise also because, as we're talking about the MFF, we're talking about unanimous agreement. So it's difficult to see how this can go much further. On the political feasibility, just to say that as a side remark, the Frugal Four are a little bit lost without a big country. So the situation would have been very different had we still the UK within the European Union. Then we would have a very different dynamic. And I would think that the chance of this going through would be much reduced if we had that dynamic. But as it stands, I think it has a very good chance of getting through. And the most likely moment when that is with the German presidency, because it will be extremely helpful if Germany has a strong political incentive to further compromise. So yes, it could be an early win for the German presidency, but in many ways that's also a win for everyone else, because it will mean that Germany has to be the one which in the end provides the oil to get the machinery going. And it is interesting, I think it's worth emphasizing again that the German debate is very different now, that the level of resistance to this is much, much lower, that many of the ones in the past which have been resisting similar proposals in the euro crisis have switched to the other side. So I see that as a major precondition for this whole package being feasible.
Thank you very much. And in fact, that links to a question: how do you consider the turn in German thinking? It is a completely different attitude from 10 years ago. Look at the turn of Merkel, Minister of Finance, and Schäuble. There's a direct commitment of Germany now to weaker countries to preserve the achievements of the EU, which looks new. The question was, how do you see this? You've already answered that. But Marta, you wanted to come in then, Janis. And then I also want to touch on we have a couple of other questions from the audience, but we haven't really talked about own resources, and I'd like to come back on that issue as well. But Marta and then Janis.
Yes, I just wanted to say about the southern countries. I think the critics, those who don't like this package, either whether it's principle or substance, I think that they will try to frame the conditionalities as those that we had during the financial sovereign debt crisis. So they will try to say that this is money in exchange for example, pension reform. Instead, this is not the case unless everything changes. But from what we can see now is that the conditions on this money is that it's used on some concrete investment projects, for example, that are in line with the priorities. So, for example, I don't know, hydrogen investment or electric buses, public transportation. So it's not about we give the government money for anything, but exchange we want reform. It's about we give you money for a list of investment that you would have done anyway, at least in principle. So I think the communication and the framing of this will be very important because it has a chance to get through, and a lot can happen on misunderstandings.
Thank you. And that picking up and answering with anticipation a question about which part of the instrument do you expect to be crucial for the green and digital transition? Thank you for addressing that point. But Janis, you wanted to come in, please.
Yes, let me share two thoughts with respect, one to the timetable and then on Germany. With respect to the timetable, what we know is that they will have some sort of exchange at the June European Council. I don't think that we want to see negotiations, but a first exchange, because you cannot avoid having a discussion about it. But then the rumors are, and I think it's highly likely, that in July, there will be an attempt, a first attempt at it, meaning that you will have an actual meeting of the European Council, a face-to-face meeting. That, I think, is the appreciation that you need that. You cannot do this through a video conference. We discussed it in the past, and July might be their first attempt. My feeling is that the German presidency and others will really try. I think this is a very positive scenario, but they will really try to get things moving in July. Maybe not finalizing it fully, but really making a big step. Also, by the way, to get things moving already in 2020 because there's already need. But politically, if we put ourselves into what the situation will be like in September, October, November, we will be seeing in all member states that the economic situation will be deteriorating, the number of unemployed increasing, the number of companies shutting down, maybe exploding. So then the prerequisites at the political level in the member states to get an agreement might not be less difficult, but probably more difficult than they will be in July. So I think there will be an attempt to really get things moving and to get closer to a deal, maybe even the most positive scenario, get a deal. I'm not saying it would, but I think there will be an attempt. On Germany, we've been discussing this in the past, it is a different world. This is a different sort of a crisis compared to the crisis we've had in the past. This, everybody knows, is not a man-made catastrophe. It is more of a natural disaster. And that makes a huge difference. And second, the single market is at stake. We've been discussing the aids, state aids, where the Germans, more than half of state aids at the European level come from the German state to national, to German companies, to the German public, to German citizens. So that state aid amount in Germany is huge, and that undermines the single market. And that is something which is of central interest from the perspective also of Germany and many others. And I think it's a strong motivator.
Okay, we have a question from the floor. I'm giving the mic to Andreas Papadopoulos. Andreas, can you hang on? I think you've muted yourself because I can't unmute you at the moment. So let me take another question and I'll come back to you. You are self-muted, so can you unmute yourself? I'll come back to you. But in the meantime, question on your favorite topic, Fabian, Brexit. The effect of a possible hard Brexit, which is looking more and more likely. I know there was an EPC commentary yesterday on the question of a Brexit extension and a discussion paper coming up next week. But as we look at the prospect of a hard Brexit, and in the context of this discussion now on the MFF and on the recovery and resilience facility, it's making the job harder, is it not? You pointed to a benefit of Brexit. We can get a deal without the Brits. Perhaps it's easier to get a deal without the Brits, but of course, a huge downside as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is looking more and more likely that we will have a no-deal Brexit. I would go further than even saying a hard Brexit, given that the aim of the British government now is the hardest of Brexit. It's not actually anything different economically. No one is talking about a soft Brexit anymore because the UK has decided that that is not what its political priorities are. So we will certainly have a hard Brexit at the end of this year if there is no extension to transition. Whether it's a no-deal Brexit or whether it is a very basic trade deal, but it will be a hard Brexit in either case. That imposes an economic cost. It imposes an economic cost on the European Union, but that economic cost on the European Union is going to be differentiated. It's going to hit different parts very differently. And to some extent, it will also open the possibility for companies to, for example, not restart activity in the UK. So if you have excess capacity in production, you will have to choose where to stop producing, and that might be then a rather easier decision to make if the UK is no longer within the single market. So having this hard Brexit at the end of the year is something which is, yes, having a negative impact, but it will have a much bigger negative impact on the UK itself. Just one footnote to add to that, because you also mentioned the own resources question. Of course, if we don't have a deal, there will have to be tariffs on the trade with the UK. And that will mean that there will be additional own resources, given that tariffs, customs duties, etc., are already own resources, which will go into the EU's coffers.
Can I just, Marta, ask on that own resources question? You mentioned some of the possible new own resources, the carbon tax, digital tax, and so on. How revolution? We've had the European Commission, this is sort of, some people say, you know, the answer to their dreams. They wanted new own resources for many, many years. They're now proposing with a justification because it's one of the ways you could pay the money back. Do you think it will fly? How radical are their proposals? Do you see a prospect of them being agreed, or do you think it will more revert when we talk to how do we pay this back to member states doing it on a system yet to be determined?
I think the proposals itself are not really radical. These are options that have been on the table for a while now, and that did not fly. Very clearly, the member states have always been quite reluctant on new own resources, especially if these imply a direct taxation, for example, on companies. So the proposal is not radical, but I think it was intelligent, the framing, because the Commission said the member states have two options. Either they pay more contributions, which they keep saying they don't want to, or they agree to these new forms of revenue for the EU. Now, I think it would have to be seen if how scared, let's say, the member states are that these new own resources could then be just the first stepping stone of a much broader capacity for the EU to raise revenue on its own. It can very well be that some member states prefer to just pay more into the EU budget in the coming years rather than giving these new powers to the EU.
I was going to say, I mean, Janis, that is the point, isn't it? It has a justification now, but there may be a concern in some member states that this is opening the doors to something that they don't like for the long term. So although it would be, as we've said time and time again, this recovery initiative is temporary and time limited, you are creating a precedent which it would be very hard to go back on. Quick thought on that. I'm going to try and take one more question from the floor and then we'll try and draw some conclusions.
Yes, I must say that I'm also rather skeptical when it comes to own resources. I'm not excluding that something will be included in the overall package, but I don't think that it will be something which will be major, something that will be big. Again, this is not a new discussion. We've seen that in the past. When it got to the moment of truth, there was always opposition from a good number of member states and their national constituents, their national parliaments, in saying yes to additional new own resources. And I think that we will see this also again this time around, because by putting together this overall package, so the new MFF, the new recovery instrument, putting so much more money at the European level, having the ECB playing a stronger role for many, there is a question with respect to the balance of power between member states and the EU. And there are some who are worried that with these innovations, things might tilt more towards the EU and its institutions rather than towards the national level. So there is not only a balance of power question, which is now showing itself because the UK has left, between member states, but it's also between the EU as an institution and member states. And I think from the perspective of many, they will be worried that what is now being put in place, the overall package, where own resources might be a small element of it, might get out of bounds and move the balance between member states and the EU into a direction they do not want in the long term. So that's why I think I'm not that positive about the perspective for own resources also.
Let me just have one more go at reaching Andreas Papadopoulos. Your mic is muted by yourself, Andreas, so unless you unmute yourself, I'm afraid I can't give you the floor. Let me just have a look. No, I'm going to have to leave that. I'll go. There's quite a specific question relating to what does it mean that the resources are expected to go to a specific country and at the same time be channeled through the programs? So you've got program money and you've got this allocation key. For example, does it mean that part of the 172 billion people talk about Italy get it, will go to research projects under Horizon Europe. Marta, that link between the way we allocate money normally and the way it would be allocated using this new key, I don't know whether we have enough detail to know that yet.
A bit. So there is some confusion, I think. So the grants, they're given through either this Recovery and Resilience Facility or through existing EU budget programs. The Recovery and Resilience Facility allocates money according to a key, and that's what we have seen, and it's published and public, which targeted the most affected member states, with Italy, France, and Spain getting about half of the whole pot. Then there are increase in budgets to other programs, and these programs, they remain as they were, with the exception of the top-up of cohesion policy, 50 billion, which has different allocation criteria. All the rest, so everything that is not the facility nor the cohesion top-up, remains just as a budget increase to existing programs. And so, for example, Horizon, that could all go to one member state because they bid for the best projects under Horizon, like it has always been.
Applying the criteria that you apply to scientific projects. Yes, we don't really have time unless it's absolutely burning. No, because I do want to just come back at the end to where we started. And I quoted Ursula von der Leyen talking about Europe's moment and David Sassoli talking about Europe's D-Day. So I want to ask you to be historians, if you like. So I think you've all agreed there is a good chance of getting a deal. The final shape, not entirely clear, but you've identified the parameters. If we get a deal, just how big a moment would this be? What would the history books say about this moment? And if we don't, what would the history books say? So Janis, I'll come to you first because you wanted the floor. Fabian, and I'll give Marta the final word. So Janis, what will the history books say if we manage to do this and if we don't?
Well, when you've asked me in the past about the long-term future, I've always said I'm agnostic because we actually do not know. But if we don't get a deal, I think I can be affirmative in that answer. If we don't get a deal on the MFF, if we don't get an agreement on the recovery instrument, I think this will actually lead us into a situation where the question will increase as to whether the EU is relevant, whether it plays a role, whether it should have a role. And combined with the deterioration of the overall situation linked to the COVID-19 crisis, and I'm talking about the economic, the societal, the political, the geopolitics, the geoeconomic aspects of it, if that deterioration happens, and the EU was not able, the member states were not able to agree on an MFF which was worthwhile and an instrument and recovery instrument which was worthwhile, I think that will actually lead us into a situation where you will see that the EU will be in a fundamental crisis, because the question will arise, why do you need it for? Now, if you get the proposal through, if you get a compromise, on the other hand, this is the usual paradoxon, we will probably not say that this was so historic. It was important, it was a key element, it was needed to get to avoid the most worst case scenario, but it was not the Hamiltonian moment which some people have already said it would be. So if we don't get a deal, this will be really, really, really bad news. If we get a deal, it will be part of the overall package to avoid the worst.
Thank you. Fabian.
Yes, I agree with that. It's a necessary moment, but it is not a sufficient moment. And I think what in the end will determine whether it is sufficient is the impact it has, and the impact overall, which will be there. And I think there it is extremely important, in my view, to pick up something Janis has already mentioned, that we keep an eye on the state aid question, because I think, yes, a recovery package is absolutely needed. We need the MFF to function, but there is something else going on within national support to national companies, which has the potential to really distort the playing field, to really undermine how the single market works. And if we don't get that right, then this moment is not going to be as important as many people think.
Thank you. Marta, last word. What will the history books say?
So if this goes through, I think the history book will say that after a decade of wrong decisions and too little too late, the EU has finally managed to react to a crisis quickly and effectively. So I hope it does.
Inshallah.
And on that upbeat and very positive note, thank you very much to all three of you. Just to mention before we go, watch out for some events next week where we'll be coming back to these topics. On Wednesday, 3rd of June, there are two events, one relating, we had a question earlier about the Karlsruhe decision, but this question relates to the impact of the Karlsruhe decision on the EU's rule of law agenda. That's on Wednesday morning, and Wednesday afternoon, we have an event entitled The Corona Presidency Testing German Leadership in Europe, organised jointly by the European Policy Centre and the German Council on Foreign Relations, DGAP. I will have the privilege of moderating that one, and we have Minister Michael Roth joining us for that. On Thursday in the morning, the permanent representative, Germany's permanent representative to the EU, Michael Klaus, will be talking in more detail about the German priorities for the presidency. And in the afternoon, we come back to a topic we discussed on a previous Friday update, migrant rights and COVID-19, organised jointly by the EPC and Egmont Institute. Among the publications next week, I mentioned the two Brexit papers. We also have a policy brief coming up on shrinking civil spaces and a discussion paper imminent on the EU's minimum wage proposal. So watch out for all of those, and we'll be back next Friday at 11 o'clock in our usual slot. I do hope many of you can join us, but in the meantime, thank you again to our speakers, but thank you to all of you for joining, for sharing your questions and your thoughts, and we look forward to seeing many of you, we hope, again next week. Have a good weekend and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.